Hello and welcome to the Rizk Assessment. I'm your host, Sharif Rizk. Today, we're going to examine the effects of the Constitution on politics and everyday life. But first, I want you to imagine something with me. Let's imagine that tomorrow, Parliament passes a new law that says anything that you print on paper has to be printed on a special kind of paper. Furthermore, that this paper is only produced in one city that may or may not be close to you. Now let's imagine that this special kind of paper, any money that goes towards purchasing this paper goes directly to the government. And now let's add another element to it. Let's imagine that Parliament passes another law saying that any soldier or any police officer can go into your house and make sure that you're using this special kind of paper, and can arrest you if you're not using that paper. This may sound preposterous, but it has happened before. In the year 1765, the British Parliament was in great debt because of the 7 Years' War. To raise money, the British Parliament decided to raise taxes on colonies in North America, now known simply as America or the United States of America, by requiring that anything printed on paper, whether it's books, pamphlets, posters, letters, whatever it may be, has to be printed on a special kind of paper, printed only in London, or produced only in London, and that paper had to have a stamp bearing the king's image. This law was unsurprisingly called the Stamp Act of 1765, and to make sure that everyone was using this special paper, the British Parliament passed a second law called the Townshend Acts in 1767. And this law authorized soldiers to write their own search warrants, go into people's houses, and make sure that this special paper was being used by everyone. And if you weren't, you'd be considered breaking the law. What this story demonstrates is that parliaments have a tremendous amount of power, and they can pass almost any law that they wish to pass. Particularly, parliaments have the power to pass laws that they think are in the best interests of the nation in general. In this case, Parliament thought it would be best for the country to have more money to spend on whatever projects it wanted to fund. This might seem like a good thing, but as you can tell in the story, it can turn very ugly very quickly. Even if parliaments pass laws that are in the best interests of the country, these laws might be so harsh that they'd be so unfair to so many people. And this is supposedly the reason why every democracy has an active, vibrant, and strong judicial branch to make sure that the government's in check. In almost any country of the world, the authority for courts to do this comes primarily from one document, the Constitution. The story I mentioned earlier is an example of how the Constitution plays a huge role in protecting rights that we take for granted every day in our lives. It provides a perpetual, sort of continuing shield from government power intruding on our lives to such an extent that it'd be too intrusive on our lives just to have the government come in at any time that it wants to. Generally speaking, a good constitution will provide you with the general right to be left alone from the government. And a better constitution will define what is a good reason for a government to go in after you and intrude on your freedom and your right to be left alone. But there's a problem here. There's a problem with defining what is considered a good reason. It's so open to interpretation. Is protection of the nation a good enough reason for a government to step in and intrude on your freedom? And if so, what counts as a threat to the nation? And how serious must the conduct be for the government to come in and say, you've lost your right to be left alone? Another thing to consider, is it considered a good reason to to protect religious aspects, like, for example, let's say if we wanted to make sure that we protect the Lord from being blasphemed against, or from having someone using his name in vain. Is that a good enough reason for a government to step in and intrude on your freedom? The answers to these questions vary, because it depends on who you're asking, and it depends on who's giving you the answer, and that's what's going to change the answer that you get almost in every circumstance. And there's various rights that have to be protected that we have as citizens in any country. And these rights should be protected in almost any circumstance. But when you begin to ask these questions, you get a million different answers. And the question then becomes, which one is the right answer? Whatever answer you choose out of those million answers, one thing has to be kept in mind, that certain rights have to be protected. But there seems to be a lot of emphasis on freedom of speech and freedom of worship of all the rights. Why is that? Why is it that those rights in particular have such huge importance in the context of the bundle of rights that people have? The philosophical reasons that explain the importance of these rights come from political philosophers like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. But the general argument is that these rights existed long before any government came into existence. Since these rights existed long before any government, then these rights should be protected from any government intrusion, no matter what the circumstances are. This line of thinking is not universally agreed on. It's highly dependent on the culture and the society in which these rights exist. A society that doesn't value freedom of speech in all its forms and in all circumstances will not have the same level of protection. This is a question that each and every one of us has to ask at some point in our lives. To what extent do we believe in the right to freedom of speech? To what extent do we believe in the right to freedom of worship for all people in society? Keeping this in mind, I would like to ask you a question to consider on your own. As Christians in particular, would we protect the value of freedom of speech to the fullest extent? And what if this freedom of speech includes the right to blaspheme and use the Lord's name in vain? Would you still protect it as a Christian? But I want to leave you with a more practical consideration of the Constitution. You may have heard that politics is a dirty game. But every game has its rules, no matter how dirty or how illogical it seems. Politics in particular is guided by the principles of a constitution. And this constitution sets out the roles, functions, responsibilities, and the powers of each branch of government. The constitution plays a huge role in our lives, and sometimes to an extent that we are not even aware of. A constitution is a law that is above all else in many. In a way, you can think of it as a testament to the power of the law and to the weakness of man in power. Humanity has seen several men and women rise to the pinnacle of power and authority, only to fall down again at some point in their lives. Here we're talking about kings and queens, sultans and caliphs, princes and princesses. The list is endless. But despite the grand stories and the legends about these people's lives, one thing is true, that their death has left a power vacuum and a void in our lives that can only be filled by something that outlasts them. And that thing is the law in the Constitution. It's from this reality that it became clear that stability must outlive its protector. No king or no queen, no sovereign in any way, shape, or form can live forever. Only the law can. The Constitution is not just a piece of paper. The Constitution is a living document. It's a document that governs our way of life in a way that we can never comprehend because it extends much further than our short lives here. Simply put, a constitution is the ideal that we strive towards. And the extent to which we believe in that constitution and the ideals and the philosophical values embedded in the constitution is the extent to which we try to live our lives in the best way possible. And we have to remember this while we're living in a diverse and multicultural society in particular. Thank you for joining me today for discussing this important topic. I'm Sharif Rizk, and we'll see you next time.